Today we're going to talk about resolving workplace conflict. This is critical thinking assignment number 6, option 1. So the conflict description that I'm going to talk about today is a conflict I encountered in my past employer. I encountered quite a bit of conflict because as HR, I acted as a mediator for a lot of different conflicts between employees, between managers and employees. Pretty much every aspect a conflict could be seen from was something that I worked to see the conflict from. So in this conflict specifically, the parties involved were 2 service managers, and they were disagreeing on how to best recruit new employees in order to continue to grow our workforce. So they did both have industry experience. Manager A, as we'll refer to him, had 15 plus years of tenure with the organization. He was very, very focused on more modern recruiting techniques, building an internship program, and really building employees from the ground up skill-wise. Manager B had about 5 years of tenure with the organization and was very, very focused on classic recruiting techniques. Things like newspapers, billboards, let's just hire really, really experienced individuals instead of wanting to train individuals from the ground up. So some cultural norms that influence this conflict. So cultural norms can arise from economic difficulties. In research done by Ader and Hala 2020, it was shown that when organizations and when people go through economic difficulties, they develop these norms, and then sometimes those norms actually carry forward even after the difficulty has been resolved. So both managers had been with the organization when there were economic difficulties, and then manager B had actually expressed concerns regarding the cost of, social media advertising and digital marketing and those kind of campaigns because they are more costly upfront compared to those classic recruiting methods that he really wanted us to do and wanted us to follow. So our managers were also from different generational backgrounds, which may have influenced their cultural norms. They did have different just experiences and things that they felt more comfortable with due to their generational gap. Multiple generations in the workplace does give rise to additional conflict. That's from Tang 2020. So when you have multiple people from multiple different backgrounds, generations included, it just gives rise to more conflict because you have more differing opinions and experiences. So we're going to talk about the conflict's impact on leadership. So this conflict is kind of unique because the next level of leadership was actually our COO. So they were definitely impacted by this conflict. He really wanted to be able to make a good decision that was best for the organization as a whole, but also very much best for each service manager because they were very, very valuable people within the organization. So leadership's creativity was also impacted by this, which research conducted by Rong, Zhang, and Z 2019 did show that leadership's creativity is impacted by conflict. So cognitive conflict positively impacts top management teams' levels of creativity, and then emotional conflict negatively impacts those the management team's levels of creativity. So if you think about that, cognitive conflict, so we're talking about discussions here, we're talking about debates, think very, very cognitive. Emotional is when you get those emotions. It's when things are raw, they're emotional, maybe people aren't thinking as objectively or as logically because they are feeling emotional. So that can have positive and negative impacts on the leadership's levels of creativity, which in this case is very, very detrimental because recruiting is a very big creative focus. All of that's from Rong, Zhang, and Z 2019. So how to overcome this behavior. So there were many behaviors that we're trying to kind of work through and overcome. Really the issue here was a lack of communication. That's what's causing this conflict is they have 2 different ideas and really they're not willing to see each other's or see the other side of the ideas. So in order to overcome this, communicate, ask questions, discover the real issue or problem that is causing the conflict. So often in conflict resolution, we treat the symptoms and we address the symptoms, but we don't actually get to the root of the problem. So 2 months down the road, we have the same exact conflict. So really discovering the real issue or the root of the problem, and then you need to create a safe space for discussion. So when you are doing conflict resolution, a lot of times people have to be vulnerable, which means you need to create a safe space where they feel like they can be vulnerable. You need to establish ground rules. That's, things like I'm going to ask you to use I statements, not you statements. We're not going to interrupt each other. We're not going to speak over each other. We're going to speak respectfully. Those kinds of things. Involving other parties can also be really beneficial. That's where I came in a lot of times is I was that other party. I was the mediator as HR. So I provided all of these strategies and then I would help structure a scenario and a time and a meeting place that met all these criteria. So de-escalation strategies that I would recommend based on the research that I did So proactive prevention efforts for individuals who are likely to have problematic relationships. So that's research from Godgard, Hu, and Anderson 2019. So essentially what that means is if you have someone who is likely to have a problematic relationship, someone who's overly emotional, someone who is maybe argumentative, someone like that, be proactive. Implement prevention efforts now. That way you can help to prevent those conflicts. Leaders need to take note of small incidents and evaluate if they're potentially escalating. Again, that's Galgard, Hu, and Anderson 2019. So as you're going along as a leader within your day, if you see incidents and you're like, maybe that's something I should take a note of, maybe that's something that's going to escalate in the future, just make a mental note of it, make a written down note of it, that kind of thing, so that if it does escalate, you're a little more prepared for the situation. Having discussions with individuals in relationships with potentially problematic people prior to the conflict arising to help them prevent. Again, have these discussions. Just be honest, communicate. So if you are someone and you're like, hey, you're going to work with this person a lot, they have had a history of kind of causing workplace conflicts. Sometimes they get a little combative or they get really, really emotional. They get really, really passionate. I just wanted to give you an upfront warning on that. And also I wanted to provide you with some strategies. We've also provided them with some strategies to move forward so we don't have so many conflicts in the workplace. Education-focused conflict management. So that comes from Rosenbaum, Barbic, Charlton, Chipman, and Fernandez, 2017. So having an education-based conflict management system is so important. If we empower our managers and we give them the tools and the education they need, then they are able to successfully de-escalate and manage conflicts. Providing individuals with the tools they need. Again, communication skills, active listening skills, violence prevention skills to manage the conflict as it arises. So the last thing you want to do with a conflict is just simply ignore the conflict and hope that it goes away, hope that it gets better. It's not going to. It's going to escalate. It's going to become more challenging to de-escalate and resolve the conflict the longer you wait. And then finally, educate everyone on conflict management techniques. So employees, leaders, managers, a lot of times I think we should just educate leaders and managers on conflict de-escalation and be like, okay, you got it, you're good to go. Nope. Let's educate everyone. Let's give everyone those communication tools and techniques because conflicts occur between coworkers all the time. And the less conflict we have, the more productive they can be. So some more de-escalation strategies we're going to implement here. So verbal de-escalation tools, including like communicating effectively, that comes from Jubenbach 2019, offering explanations and reasoning within the conflict, being realistic regarding the situation at hand. That's really, really important. So sometimes I think it's really easy for us to get into hyperbole and get into overgeneralizations, and that's really not valuable. We have to deal with the conflict we have at hand, with the situation, and with the tools we have to fix it. So then also be mindful of your own behavior and reactions. When you're in a conflict with someone, you need to, keep your cool, especially as a leader or as a mediator in the situation. You have to be very mindful of your reactions because you are there to help resolve the conflict, not to escalate the conflict. That's all Jubenbach 2019. Things to avoid include the conflict. Don't avoid the conflict. Address the conflict. Being defensive in the conflict. Everyone needs to take responsibilities. There's no need for you to be defensive. This is just simply a time for you to lay out the facts, lay out what's happened, and find a solution to make it better. Overgeneralizations, so don't do that. Just try to speak very, very specifically to address specific situations. And then placing blame and neglecting responsibility. So don't try to place blame on the other person. All the parties here are involved in conflict, which means everyone has some responsibility in it, which means everyone needs to work together to resolve it. So that's all from Loretto 2018. So then impact of solutions. So I proposed 4 major solutions. So proactive prevention efforts for individuals who are likely to have problematic relationships. Positive impact of that, you're definitely being proactive. You're preventing conflicts as they arise. I think that's always better to be proactive than reactive. Potential negative, it can be challenging sometimes to judge which relationships are problematic. And maybe if someone is potentially someone who's considered problematic, they may think every relationship is problematic. So it can backfire sometimes. Education focused on conflict management. So pros, tools and education enable people to be successful. You can't expect someone to be good at something if you don't teach them how to do it. There aren't really any cons to that scenario. Providing people education is always valuable in my opinion. Verbal de-escalation tools. So it's extremely valuable because you can provide employees and leaders with tools that they can help resolve conflict as it arises through communication. So you can de-escalate and solve conflict at the same time. Not really any downsides to that either. So then avoiding conflict, defensiveness, overgeneralization, placing blame, and neglecting responsibility. You're going to avoid all of those things. So the positives when you avoid those are that individuals involved in conflict are able to actually work through the conflict, actually address the conflict, resolve the issue, and move forward so they can be productive. Aren't really any downsides to actually addressing a conflict and getting better. So workplace conflicts are going to occur in every single workplace. I don't think you're ever going to be in a situation where they're not going to. So it's really all about providing the resources to the leaders and managers that they need to be able to successfully manage those conflicts. And then those are my references, and those are my references as well. Thank you so much.